Eleanor Langley and her husband Glenn lived in a cozy little brick rambler on a busy street. Cars sped by all day, every day, but they weren't too bothered as their house was set back from the road a comfortable distance. Their mailbox was down by the street. Glenn had been in terrible pain for weeks with arthritis, made even worse by several days of rain. Not surprising for the state of Washington. Rain and trees. Trees and rain. There's a lot of nice things to say about Washington, but people always seem to somehow gravitate to those topics. It was on such a day when Eleanor decided to sit on the porch and just listen to the sound of the rain. Glenn stayed inside, keeping any distance he could from the rain. Eleanor made herself a cup of tea, then settled into one of the wicker chairs outside. She loved the refreshing feeling of the moist air blowing against her face. Her mind wandered. Life was good. She was happy. If only Glenn wasn't in so much pain every day, they would have it all. She smiled. She was just about to run a mental checklist of what food was in the pantry that she could convert into tonight's dinner when something caught her eye. There was something blue next to the mailbox. Could someone have left a package? In the rain? She stood up and squinted to see more clearly through the pouring rain. No, not a package. It was in the shape of a coat. Yes, that was it, a coat, a blue raincoat. It was small, though, a size to fit a child. Wait, there was a child in the raincoat. She could just about make out slight facial features, not enough to see whether a boy or a girl, but enough to tell that this child was young, very young. Why was a child of this age out by themselves in the pouring rain, especially next to a road where speeding is so prevalent? She tried calling to them, saying, "Sweetie, are you lost?" But her voice was drowned out by the sound of the rain. She realized that she had to go down there and see about this child. She went back into the house and grabbed her raincoat. As she put it on, Glenn asked, "Do you need a raincoat to sit on the porch?" "No," she replied. "There's a child down by the mailbox, in the rain, next to the road. I'm going down there to find out what's going on." Glenn nodded and sheepishly apologized for not getting up to help. "No, you stay there. I'll be right back," she told him. She stepped down onto the porch and the rain seemed a little heavier. She looked straight ahead but could not make out the shape of the child anymore. She put the hood of her raincoat up and walked down the driveway to the mailbox. When she got there, there was nothing to see. No child, no raincoat, not even any footprints in the wet soil. A chill ran through her, partly from the cold, wet air, and partly because of worrying where that child was. She walked back to the house. "So what was the story, Elle?" asked Glenn. There was nothing there. No child, no tracks, nothing. Glenn shrugged. "You know how things can look strange in the rain? It distorts your view of things. There probably wasn't a child there at all, just a reflection off of something." She was going to give him a sharp retort of, "I know what I saw, Mr. Smarty Pants," but instead she sighed a heavy sigh and went to the kitchen to prepare their supper. That night, her sleep was fragmented. She kept waking up every so often and in her mind flashing on what she was sure was a child, all alone. But she went down to look. She tried, and that's all anyone could do. The child in a blue raincoat would just have to be one of those unanswered mysteries forgotten over time. The next day, the rain continued. She was almost afraid to look down towards the mailbox for what she might see. But she did anyway. Her breath caught short. There he was. She could see that it was a boy now. And he was looking at her. No expression that she could discern on his face, though. Eerie. Almost like a life-sized doll propped up against the mailbox to scare away the crows. She opened the door and called out, "Little boy, are you lost? Where is your mommy?" The child's face showed no response. It just kept staring at her. She started to take a few steps forward despite the rain. She looked down so she didn't trip over the 3 steps leading down from the porch, but when she looked up, the boy was gone again. She felt a wave of nausea suddenly as she realized that she obviously was, in fact, seeing things. But it seemed so real. So real that the next day, another filled with rain, she saw him again. She walked outside, not even bothering to put on a coat or look down. She kept her eyes on him. She had perhaps taken 10 steps in his direction when suddenly he wasn't there anymore. Now she was fed up. She stormed out to the mailbox and looked in all directions. She tried calling out, but was met with no response. There was simply nothing there to see or hear. The next day, the sun came out. It felt like a spring miracle, since it had been so many days of continuous rain. Suddenly, neighbors that Eleanor hadn't seen in a while were all coming outside to enjoy the sun. Beatrice, a woman who lived next door, walked over to say hello. "Hello, Eleanor. Isn't it a beautiful day?" she exclaimed. Eleanor nodded enthusiastically. "Yes, it sure is. To tell you the truth, I was starting to feel like the rain was getting to me. I guess when you stare at the rain long enough, you can imagine you see things that maybe aren't really there." Beatrice looked at her with a confused expression on her face. Talk about statements coming out of left field. "Did you see something, El?" Eleanor paused a few seconds, debating on whether or not to tell the story, which by now was starting to sound more ridiculous all the time. But she didn't want to leave Beatrice hanging there, so she told her story. The first day, the second day, the third day, and now today. But no boy in the blue raincoat. Beatrice looked a little rattled, not knowing what to say to such a tale. "Well, wow, that's really, interesting. Don't be so hard on yourself. Things have explanations. Sometimes it just takes a while to find them." Eleanor gave a half smile and just agreed. They chatted a few moments more about things going on in town that coming month, a farmer's market, a wine tasting, a 3-day flea market, things like that. It felt good to get other, fresher thoughts in her head. A few minutes later, they said goodbye. 30 minutes later, there was a knock at the door. It was Beatrice. "Come in," Eleanor told her, but was clearly puzzled as to why Bea was there when she couldn't remember a time when Beatrice came over without being invited. "I had to come right over and tell you what my Harry told me." Harry was her husband. "As you know, Harry grew up in this town and knows a lot more about it than we do." "Well, I told him the story you told me. I hope you don't mind." Eleanor felt embarrassed, and it showed. "No, honey, I just needed to tell you something Harry remembered. He said that back in the 70s, there was a little boy who lived in the house you and Glenn own now. They had a son, Robert, who was 5 years old. He wore a blue raincoat. One day it was raining. What else is new? And his mother watched him walk down the driveway to be picked up by the school bus. The phone rang. Robert's mother turned around to pick up the receiver from the wall. Suddenly there was a screech of brakes and the sound of people screaming. She dropped the phone and ran down the driveway. Apparently a driver, late for work and driving way too fast for the weather and road conditions, saw Robert at the curb but couldn't swerve in time. Robert was hit by the man's car. People came from every direction and gathered in the pouring rain as the screaming mother held her child's lifeless body in her arms. It was the most tragic day our town had ever seen. But you know what's also sad, El? Eleanor stared blankly, not knowing what to say or what to make of this disturbing fact. As sad as it was, after a couple of weeks, people stopped talking about it. Robert's parents moved away, and the story was forgotten. As a matter of fact, it took Harry nearly 15 minutes to remember the boy's name. I think that's so sad. Eleanor and Glenn agreed. It was sad. Beatrice left and went back to her own house. Eleanor sat on the love seat next to Glenn's chair. They both sat silently for a minute. Glenn lit a cigarette and opened his can of beer. They both heard the rain begin again and winced. I don't think I'll ever not think of that story when I hear the rain, you know? Damn it. She got up, walked to the kitchen, and started washing a few dishes. She looked out the window that faced the street and stopped. She saw him. He was there. She didn't even think to say anything to Glenn. She flew out of the house so fast, almost slipping on the 3 steps, and ran down the driveway. He was there. She didn't want to spook him, so she stopped some distance from the boy. "Hello," she said. "Is your name Robert?" The boy's normally blank expression broke into a wide smile. "It is, isn't it? You are Robert. I'm so happy to see you." She took a few steps closer, and Robert did not move away, so she got even closer. Finally, she reached her arms out, and, just for a fleeting instant, she embraced the boy. It only lasted a second, and she was left holding nothing. He was gone again. Her heart filled, and she smiled. That's it, she thought. That's all he wanted. Somebody to remember him. She felt lighter than she had in days. She turned back to the house. She walked in so excited to tell Glenn about the boy, but he was not in his chair. A cigarette still burned in the ashtray. The can of beer, open, sat next to it, still mostly full. "Glenn?" she spoke aloud. No answer. She walked into the kitchen, the bedroom, and checked both bathrooms. Glenn was not there. She walked to the back of the house and shouted his name to the backyard. Glenn was not there either. Where in the world could you have gone, she thought. His arthritis was really acting up the past few days. He hardly even gets up from his chair. She walked back to the living room. Glenn must be in the front of the house, of course. So she opened the door and looked down the driveway. And the little boy, Robert, was there again. She could see him clearly, even through the sheets of rain. And he wasn't alone. She gasped. She could recognize Glenn's frame and his clothes anywhere. Like the boy, he was semi-transparent and was holding the boy's hand. She screamed without even thinking as she watched Glenn and the boy turn their backs to her and fade out of sight. It took months to have the ability to think clearly about that day. She would never know, though, that it was Glenn's time, and that he had passed just as the little boy reappeared at the mailbox. The boy was happy to be remembered finally, but he needed someone to show him where to go. And Glenn, holding Robert's tiny little hand in his, led him there.